Hi, my name is Cami, and I have been teaching piano for a few decades now, and I've been able to go to college and study piano pedagogy and music therapy, and I have been in choirs and bands, and I have had many opportunities to teach in private schools and public schools and conservatories and privately in my home in groups and online. And I love music. I love teaching piano. And I thought this year it might be a fun idea to make some videos about what I'm teaching my students in my studio. And maybe some of you can follow along, and I'll try to provide some direction to you as far as what you could do. I have some excellent tools that my students use that I will refer you to and show you how to use them. And I'm hoping this can be valuable to you if you want to learn piano, but just on your own. Of course, you won't have the one-on-one feedback from a teacher. You won't be able to submit assignments and have the feedback from that. And you won't have the opportunity to be within the group in the studio and participate in recitals and such. But I want to give to you the opportunity to learn and to grow and to do it in a methodical way along with us. So hopefully I will be able to keep up with making these videos for you, and you can follow along and you can learn piano this year. And one question people have is, how do I play piano? And that is a very complicated question and a very simple question at the same time. Learning how to play the piano is much like learning how to read. When you're learning a new language, you start out, say, as a baby in the womb, and you aren't even speaking yet. Maybe you're making sounds. I'm not sure if that happens in the womb, but mostly you're listening to the rhythms of the mother's body, the heartbeat, or the rhythm of breathing, or the sounds outside of the room. You're mostly in a listening atmosphere. And then the baby's born, and they start creating their own sounds, babbling, just trying different sounds and playing around with them. And then you start putting sounds together and making words, and you start getting feedback from your parent, whoever is your mentor in that way, to let you know when you're saying a word and give you that feedback. And then over time you start putting words together and make phrases, and then simple sentences, and then more complex sentences. But you learn so much about the inflections and how you speak by listening. Music is much the same way. In order to have a really great sense of what music is, you start with listening and really getting familiar with all the subtle nuances that are there that you hear. An example I like to give is that if, say for example, English is not your first language, and you are trying to speak it, you might use all the right words. They may or may not be in the right order, but generally speaking, you're getting the message across. It may be hard for a native speaker to understand what is being said, though, because they derive so much information from the nuances, the rise and fall of your voice, and when you pause and hold them for a little bit longer, for example. And so much can be learned in this phase by listening and also by playing around. In music, that's called improvisation. It just means trying things, seeing how they sound, seeing what you think of them. And so that is what happens before a child starts to read, or even an adult. Sometimes they'll start to read at the same time, but you do need to do a lot of listening in order to become a really good communicator in that language. And so you start with this listening, you start with this improvisation and playing around. And that's what we're doing in our studio this year. The first 3 months of the year, January, February, and March. And I will share the calendar that our studio will be using this year. I will share it with you so you can see what our plan is. And I will also put this in the description so you can print it out for yourself. So in January, we'll be starting with the building blocks, much like you would start with becoming familiar with all of the sounds and patterns in piano. So these are called your scales, your chords, and your arpeggios. And then we start to put them together in what is similar to phrases with reading. We have cadences that help you know, is that a question? Is that an answer? Is that the end? Is that the middle? We have different elements we put in for musicality and for expression, and we will be addressing those during January. And then in February, we're going to start improvising in different styles. There are many different styles of music, and becoming aware of what components create that style is what we'll be focusing on during the month of February. And we will be improvising in a different style each week during February. We'll also be focusing on ear training, which is another important component, again, with all that listening, developing those listening skills. That will be in February. And then in March is when we will be preparing for our first recital, our spring recital. And this will be a fun thing. I think we're gonna do a silent film for this recital. We'll see if that works out, but it will be people improvising to different parts of the silent film. So you will, of course, be welcome to watch that recital because it does air on YouTube, and you can see all the fun things that people were able to come up with, and maybe you can come up with something of your own and put it to a silent film as well. That would be fun. So at that point, you have a feel for, you know how to speak. You're getting to where you can communicate through speaking piano, as I call it. And now you're ready to move into adding some layers. And that's what happens when you begin to read. You know, when you're learning to read a new language, you start with, what is the name of that sound? So we would say, oh, that's an A, that's a B, for example, or maybe they're sight words. This word says the, this word says and you learn to just see it by sight. So in this phase, you're starting to learn the names to the sounds and the symbols. So it's one thing to say A, it's another thing to know what the symbol A looks like and what sound does it make. So several different layers when you're getting into reading. And reading, as you know, with language, there's so many rules and patterns and things that you need to understand in order to interpret symbols. That's what reading in music is interpreting the language of music through musical symbols. So for 6 months of the year, because this really requires a lot of time and work to develop, we're going to be going into learning how to read music and sight read. And I will be making a separate video about what sight reading is. But I will show you what those 6 months look like on our calendar. So in the month of April, we are going to be getting into music history and music literature, understanding how these have influenced music and becoming familiar with the different components in the different major music developmental periods of those times. And then in May, we will be moving into music theory, which is just another way of saying learning all the patterns of the symbols and how they all work together. And then we will have a recital in the summer, and we'll go back into theory in July. And then in August, we're going to start learning how to play from lead sheets and how to create harmonization. So when you get to that point, we'll explain what that means and how to do it. And that opens a whole new world, especially for jazz musicians. And then when we move into September, that's our last month for learning the music theory component. And then the last 3 months of the year are for writing, because you do need to learn how to read before you learn how to write. But while reading has to do with interpreting symbols, writing has to do with essentially learning how to use symbols to communicate what something should sound like. And that is a skill in and of itself that requires a deeper level of understanding. And so we will move into writing during those last 3 months of the year. So in October, we will have our recital, but it will be a composition recital. We will be teaching you how to compose. And in November, we're going to be going over all those songs that you have learned and cementing them to memory so you can sit down at a piano and play those songs whenever you want and enjoy those things that you've learned. And then in December, we have a final project, which is taking some of our best performances and using video editing to make them even more impactful or interesting or entertaining for you to have as something to look back on and remember that you had created. So that is what we're doing in the Piano Panacea studio this year. And I hope you will join us and come along. Leave comments and I will try to respond to them if you have questions. And we are looking forward to having this experience with you.